Professor Charles Xavier has always been known as a relatively peaceful and hopeful mentor for those that attend his school for young, gifted minds, and for his team, the X-Men. He is one of the Marvel Universe's most powerful telepaths, but he has also sometimes appeared as one of the most frail mutants associated with the team. When people think of Charles Xavier, they might think of Cerebro, his ability to read and see into minds, his wheelchair, Sir Patrick Stewart, maybe even James McAvoy, if you've only seen the more recent X-Men films, of course, because otherwise, I mean, come on, it's Stewart all the way. But in just thinking of those traits and people, there is a lot that is being forgotten. Today we're here to remind you of some of the other powers and abilities that make Charles Xavier a force to be reckoned with as we count down the top 10 superpowers you didn't know Professor X had. And be sure to stick around to the end of this list where I will have some bonus content coming your way. Alright, let's get counting. Number 10. Scientific Genius. When it comes to some of the most brilliant minds in the Marvel Universe, Professor Charles Xavier might not be the one you think of first. Instead, you'd probably think about Tony Stark, Hank Pym, Reed Richards, maybe even listing fellow mutant Hank McCoy before thinking of Charles himself. However, Charles Xavier is even above some listed there in terms of his intellect. He grew up privileged, well educated, and even without his upper class background, has continued to be a purveyor of knowledge. He is one of the Marvel world's leading geneticists, focusing specifically on mutation and mutants in his research. He invented Cerebro himself and holds degrees for biophysics, psychology, anthropology, and psychiatry, with more than one PhD to boot. Pretty impressive. Even if you don't count all the added knowledge he could access as a telepath, he would still be one of the most brilliant minds without his mutant abilities. Pretty crazy. He spent a lot of time in school. Number 9. Astral Projection. Like most telepaths, Charles Xavier doesn't just read minds, but he can also project himself onto the astral plane. In fact, he has a tendency to wage a lot of battles there, as he usually hasn't been known as a skilled fighter. In fact, when most people think of Charles, they still think of his iconic wheelchair. However, while Charles has spent a lot of time in and out of a wheelchair, having his legs crippled and crushed multiple times, he has spent more time over the last 20 years healed and walking around in between, well, I mean, also being dead, actually. Still, astral projection has always been a cherished skill, as while astral projecting, Charles often gets to feel free from the confinements of his disability. In a way, it is a form of escapism for him, though it has also caused him harm as well. After he had been healed, he found himself crippled once more when the Shadow King crushed his legs again on the astral plane. So, like with many powers, astral projection is a double-sided coin. It's got its rewards and it's got its risks. Number 8. Mental blocks. While not necessarily a thing that Xavier benefits from directly, something that he seems to be pretty into doing is putting mental blocks in the minds of those who need them, mutants that he deems too powerful, or even mutants that feel they don't have enough control. Though of course it's a little bit of a strange power when you consider that Professor X has also been known to do this next thing quite well. Number 7. Empath. Not only can Professor Xavier hear your thoughts, and maybe even see your nudes, but he can also feel your emotions. Ever since his mutant powers activated, he found himself overwhelmed with the feelings and thoughts of millions and millions of people surrounding him, and originally had a hard time shutting this off. It's one thing to hear a thought, but to feel it is entirely another. This might also explain why he so often wanted humans and mutants to work together, as opposed to against one another. He can feel all the hope in the world at any given moment, and I would think that this would help to provide some inspiration for his motives. His empathy even one time helped him to defeat the Xanax, when he was able to channel the world's happiness and hope and pass it on to be used as a weapon against the alien race that was bent on destroying Earth. Because their weakness was happiness, so I don't know. I don't write this stuff, I just read it. Number 6. Skill Swap. While Professor X, or just X as we know him now, is a genius on his own, he also has a very powerful ability that allows him to feed into his brilliance. Using telepathy, he is able to quickly absorb information from one person's mind, allowing him to learn new skills and information using his telepathy quickly and efficiently. Not only can he absorb knowledge in this way, but he can also give it too. In fact, many of the reasons so many X-Men and students of the Xavier Institute have telepathic defenses and often know so many languages is because Professor X has given them that knowledge. So he's not just leveling up his own intelligence, but he's also using that knowledge to help his pupils and his X-Men as well. Number 5. Mind Blast. When it comes to telepaths, a lot of comic book fans make the mistake of thinking that even the most powerful could be useful in a fight. In truth, telepaths is just combat on a different plane. Such was the case when Professor Xavier took on the Dark Phoenix during the events of the Phoenix Saga. They battle in their minds, but in doing so can still cause a lot of pain and damage to their opponent, both physically and mentally through doing so. Such was the case when Professor X successfully unleashed a Mind Blast on Dark Phoenix. Professor X is so strong he even succeeded in momentarily incapacitating her with his Mind Blast. It was only a moment, but still, it's Dark Phoenix, so that's pretty impressive, guys. To even momentarily do something to Dark Phoenix is like, whew. Number 4. Shut down minds. Professor X has the ability to not just alter your mind, but also to shut it down. In fact, when he went up against Magneto, it was this ability that caused him to take in Magneto's anger and unleash Onslaught. Onslaught represents the darker side of Professor Xavier, though many think of him as a melding of the two. Professor Xavier and Magneto. As this power opens Charles up to the influence of another person's emotions and thoughts so intensely, it is not a power he uses often. After all, it can create more harm if it leads to Professor X being corrupted by darker thoughts and feelings. Like he was with Magneto, so yeah. Number 3. Give more control over powers. Another power that Xavier has been able to use to benefit mutant kind is to help certain mutants gain more control over their powers. He did this with Rogue in X-Men Legacy issue 224, allowing her to share a kiss with Gambit without fear of harming him. Ooh, so cute! Just as Professor X can build up walls, he can also help knock them down when they are in the way. Granted, he also needed the help of the AI Danger to complete the process, but afterwards Rogue was free to control her powers. Of course, later on in her own story we have also learned that her fear is a big part of what limits her abilities, so how much of her control was Rogue in X-Men Legacy and how much was Professor X's telepathic abilities is sort of up to interpretation. Still, Professor X definitely has the ability to help and heal minds through both means, through helping someone psychologically deal with it and through telepathic manipulation. Or telepathic surgery, I guess, is sort of what went on. Number 2. Manipulate time. At least the perception of time. When Charles Xavier trains his pupils telepathically, he can make it feel like they have been training for months, while in actuality it has only been a few hours. This is how he shares his knowledge with his students and gets them to be as skilled as they are in a short period of time. Honestly, this also makes him one of the best teachers ever. Like, if I could have learned all of trigonometry in the span of just 1 hour, I would have been the happiest student ever. Jeez, I spent way too much time trying to learn trigonometry. Think of all the other time that you would then have to apply to other skill sets, like especially as a mutant, like you could spend so much more time controlling your powers. And you know, people might think that's all that goes on at the X-Mansion, just training, but likely they'd be wrong, because if Charles can teach you a language in an hour, he can probably also teach you American history and geography within a day as well. So I assume like their regular school subjects are just like a class with Charles for a day, and then he's like, now you know all of high school, bye. Number 1. Immortality. Xavier has been thought dead at least 5 times in the comics. Yes, no matter how many times his body, and sometimes his brain, is destroyed, he still keeps coming back. His immortality can be attributed to the fact that his soul always seems to live on. This has been the secret to his return every time. Most recently, his soul was restored to Phantom X's body after we discovered that Xavier's soul was actually being trapped in the astral plane by the Shadow King. If you're a huge Professor Xavier fan, I hope you rediscovered a power that you may have forgotten that he possesses. Are you Team Professor X or Team Magneto? Do you prefer the two working side by side? Do you prefer young Charles or do you prefer old Charles? Who's your favorite telepath? Let us know in the comments below. And speaking of comments, it's time to turn to some comments from one of our latest videos, Top 10 Superpowers You Didn't Know Magic Had. Ronald Marcano comments, Magic's always been full of surprises. You are not wrong. I feel like she's always got an ace up her sleeve, and she can be very tricksy. Like most magic users, she's sharp with a quick mind. Jevin Jackson says, I think Colossus is a proud older brother that can be assured that his little sister can defend herself. Just my opinion as an older brother. As someone who is the oldest sibling in my family and has younger sisters, I totally agree with you. It's probably really nice for Pyotr that he doesn't have to worry. Even from a young age, growing up in Limbo, Illyana proved how powerful she could be, eventually escaping her captor Belasco and then later overthrowing him. Also, who wouldn't want to have a little sis that rules a whole pocket dimension filled with demons? That's just so badass. And that's all the time we have for comments today. Be sure to comment below for a chance to have your thoughts and your feels shouted out in a future video. And why not like and subscribe while you're on your way down there? I know you want to. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you, as always, to stay nerdy, YouTube.